So this video is for Dan. I am going to show him how I solder headers onto different boards. Now there are about 1 million different ways to do this. These happen to be the ways I have been successful with and then I come back to time and again. If you need to put headers onto a board like this ESP8266, the easiest way to do this, because it has 2 rows or 2 columns depending, would be to mount the headers into a breadboard. If that didn't pop out, long end down, short end up, and then drop it on there like that and then solder it down. What I will typically do is I will solder one end, then the other end to secure it, and then work my way through the middle. So that works out well for these sorts of boards. Now if you have something smaller, so let's pretend this is your board that you're going to have for your drone, where you're putting in a much smaller header. In this case it's a 3-pin. I have 2 methods for this. Before I get into those, let's talk about actually breaking it if you need to shorten the stuff. Most of these are very easily snapped by hand. So if you got your fingers in the right place, you can snap it pretty cleanly. Or you could use a tool like some side cutters or some wire strippers to break them up like that. So I've just used the cutting edge here. I try to avoid using my wire side cutters for this task because you can sometimes mess up. General rule of thumb is cut metal with metal, and this one always cuts with metal, and use this one for anything is my take on it. I think let me put it this way, it's very similar to the seamstresses who say this pair of scissors should only ever be used for cloth. Yeah, that's kind of where it comes from. Anyhow, enough of that goofiness. So let's say I wanted to put here, and of course you're going to put your thing in, short end into the board, long end is what's going to be sticking out, and you're going to try to solder and it's going to fall out, right? And it's really annoying. For this, okay, so here's the 2 ways I do it. And you can kind of use both of these ways together if you like. Get yourself, if you don't have them already, some clamping tweezers. These are very, very handy. In this case, I'm going to use a smaller one. So all I'm doing is kind of grabbing it at one point so it's clamped there. So that clamp is just strong enough to hold it in place, right? Then I come in with my soldering iron and I tag, and watch this, see, in this case I'm not using a vise, I'm actually just using the side of my hand to hold the tweezers, and then boom, one of them is soldered, right? And now if you have at least one soldered, it's not going to pop out. Now to finish it off, you could go into your pan of ice or whatever, or your helping hands or whatever handy tool you have, and finish it off. Now this is an example of where I actually prefer to have it down here because the heat keeps my hand steadier, because hand steadiness and shaking, it happens to everybody. It's been happening to me a lot too. And having it on the flat surface is sometimes easier than the vise. So there's a couple little 3 pins there. So I held it, I got that, soldered one, soldered the rest. Okay. If you don't have these, and I really recommend if you do electronics work that you have these 2. I use these 2 all the time for this sort of stuff. If you don't have that, well, there's another option that I use a lot, super glue. The whole point of this, again, is just to hold the part in place during that initial soldering. So I put a tiny little dab of super glue kind of in between some of the pins. You don't have to be magical or super good at this, but you don't want to get too much super glue on the pins themselves. Now the solder will burn that off, but still. So once I got the super glue in there, then I'm gonna, let me stuff it into here. Oh, it takes a steady hand. Here, this is where tweezers can come in real handy. So here I've got super glue on this part, and I'm putting it onto my board and just hold it for that super glue to take. If it's a quick glue, it's only going to take 5 or 10 seconds. So now that second header on here has been placed, and the glue, we're not looking for structural super strength, we just don't want the darn thing to fall out while we're soldering. So again, I'll put it either into my vise and soldering, or I could have this clipped and kind of held down with my hand, which is what I'd probably prefer for this. The challenge I saw with a part that you guys are going to be soldering is that there's another connector. It's their special connector. I don't have one, but I'm pretending I have one here, right? So pretend this header is your special connector that you don't want to mess up, because you don't want to spend another $125 for this. This is really, you're going to have to come at a very tight angle and just take your time. Heat up that joint, get the solder in there, heat up the joint, feed that solder in there. These, and my iron is cold right now, it looks like. It's not behaving. There. That is going to be tricky. For yours, I would recommend doing the inside one that's closer to your goofy connector, and then do the outside. But from the picture, it looked like a pretty tight fit. So, and if you see you don't have enough solder on part of it, just go in and add it. If you put too much, use a solder sucker to clean it out. I'm trying to think what else. I think that'll get you going. So either use the tweezers, self-clamping tweezers, or use super glue. I use super glue a lot, so don't be afraid of just putting a tiny little dab of super glue. Any brand, it doesn't matter. If you're breaking up if you have to break your pins, just use a tool or your hands if you can, but a tool is actually going to give you better control if you're watching it. So there you go. I hope that helps. I was going to mention something else, but it doesn't come to mind right now, so that could always be another video.